They were like, can we go to vacation Bible school? They were 12 and 8. And my heart pitter-pattered. I think it triggered me a little bit. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? What would I do? Everything in me wanted to go, hell no.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 29, part 2. This is the second half of my conversation with Vennie Kocsis. We left off the end of part 1 when Vennie was talking about how her family had been banished from the cult that she was raised in Alaska. In this episode, Vennie's going to talk about her adjustment to normal life, everything from wearing normal clothes to adjusting to modern day conveniences that we're all used to and take for granted. I enjoyed talking to her about raising free-thinking kids and what that's like, and finding her authentic self. Vennie devotes a lot of her time to educating people about modern-day cults, and she talks about that a little bit at the end. If you'd like to learn more about Vennie's work, her art, her podcast, Survivor Voices, or connect with her through Facebook or Twitter, go to her website at venniekocsis.com. Here's the second half of my conversation with Vennie Kocsis. How long were you in the cult in Alaska then?
I was there for 7 years until I was 14, and something happened with my sister. I don't want to give away the ending of my book, just in case somebody grabs it. We were banished, and we ended up in Tennessee.
Wow.
And of course, as a teenager, I ran towards everything that, they had taught was Satan.
You're like, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, at the same time, I'm transitioning from having no electricity and no running water for 7 years. I was never taught about slavery and things like that. So there was all this cultural stuff that was so confusing to me.
Wow.
But we lived with my grandmother. So if you stayed with grandma, you still had to go to church, and she was Pentecostal. So I was still kind of in that culture, but I could wear pants now, and I could wear a bathing suit now, and things like that.
Wow. So at around 14 years old, your mom and your siblings are all banished from this cult in Alaska.
Now my brother ran away. That's another story. I don't want to eat up your time.
No. Yeah. Well, you wrote a book about it, so I don't want to make you repeat every chapter.
First time he got caught, and that was another practice they had when he came back. He had to live with an elder and get shadowed, and wasn't allowed to speak to anybody for 30 days.
Oh my gosh.
And the second time he succeeded in getting out and ended up in foster care. Wow. So when we got banished, it was my mom, my sister, and me. And my mom was pretty slick. She immediately called the state of Alaska and made sure that last bit of dividends came to her.
Wow.
And she was able to buy a trailer, put a down payment on it.
Yeah, she was shrewd. I mean, her mind, she was brainwashed, but she was shrewd. It's like so weird how someone's mind can be. It's like you're in two different places. I don't know.
At one time I think she was desperate. So of course, naturally, her mind is thinking, where am I going to get money? Where am I going to get money? Okay, I've got to secure this money. And maybe my grandmother also helped her a little bit, and said, you need to do this, Linda, and you need to do this and this and this.
And while you guys were in the compound in Massachusetts and then in Alaska, were you in contact, your mom or any of you, in contact with family?
My grandmother came to visit one time, and that's always been an oddity to me, because they even let her take us. It's so weird. They let her take us for 2 weeks. Now, this was also after Sam Fife died, but somehow she contacted that compound, got permission to come and take us for a week and a half or almost 2 weeks, kind of sightseeing in this RV. So I write a scene in my book about having to wear skirts with jeans under them all the time. And now I'm in the real world, and it's so strange to me. And I'm definitely feeling like the odd girl out. And my grandmother tells my mom, let those girls take their skirts off. This isn't right. We don't want to stand out. My grandma had a little bit of narcissism in her too, and my mother and her arguing until finally my mom caved and I got to take my skirt off and I'm standing inside of the RV and I literally feel naked in jeans.
Wow.
Like I feel so uncomfortable and weird. Like people can see my body.
Oh yeah, well that's interesting because you're used to having this skirt that kind of covers you.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I mean, just all the adjustments that you would have to go through,
Yeah.
so that's a 2 week period. You guys just went on like a vacation kind of thing?
Yeah, she took us to Denali. Um, I remember the trip to Denali. It was a lot of driving, really, a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of driving. And I do write about this. I had gotten into I was starting to get very cynical. I'm a very cynical thinker. And so I was in my puberty years and I'm listening to my grandmother and my mother for the first time ever in my life. And I've got all this anger towards my mom.
Yeah.
And my grandma's kind of like nitpicking on my mom. And I'm like, cool.
Ah,
Sounds
interesting.
pop punk on the RV listening. And I'm like actually enjoying it
That's
because
really funny.
finally somebody's like putting my mother in her
Yeah,
place.
putting her in her place, and
Yeah.
she's basically made every decision for your life. I mean, every decision because of being in this strict environment. You had no control at all over anything you did or anything. And so now you're hearing someone kind of criticize it or
Mhm.
get after your mom. That's yeah, I can see why that would be
And
satisfying.
seeing the truth about my family a little bit, just a little glimpse, like, okay, because I've never again, since I was a baby, met any of my family
Wow.
at this point. So I'm
Extended
getting a
family, right?
glimpse. Yeah. Hmm.
Wow. Well, so you guys get banished. You're in Tennessee. You
Hmm.
start kind of getting acclimated to normal life. Now, you said a while ago that you never really you had doubts about the existence of God even when
Hmm.
you were in the compound.
Absolutely. My story is very interesting. My father went on to work at Groom Lake for the rest of his life. So he's a very cosmology minded man. And I have quite clear memories of being one, two, and three. And then my memories drop off and come back again. So I
Mm,
always was kind of like this highly sensitive child where I could feel people's emotions and like feel their moods and things like that. So it was kind of like had the ability to call bullshit. And so there's doubt and then there's fear, right? And
mhm.
that's constantly struggling against each other inside of you.
Did your questions and doubts begin to um, kind of come to the surface when you left and were in Tennessee?
Yes, but then there's fear that follows that doubt. So it's like, I don't know about this. Oh, don't think that way because then you'll go to hell. So
Yeah.
that followed me. When I look back at my writing, I see it start to change when I'm getting into like my mid 20s,
Hmm.
when I'm really starting to explore. There's two authors that changed me. Anne Rice, the first time I read The Witching Hour, for some reason, those characters were like, they answered questions for me about myself. And
Wow.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh,
And I
cool.
loved him because it just felt like finally somebody was like writing out my sadness. So those two authors had a big impact on me.
That's really cool. As a adolescent or as a young adult?
I'm going to say more as a young adult.
Okay.
Yeah, I got when I went to college, my mind was really open to a lot. I studied creative writing and theater, so I started digging into more different types of books and different
Hmm.
cultures and things.
Oh, that's really cool. So it seems like your mind starts to become opened. Oh, it
Mhm.
opens up to all of these, to the world, really,
Yeah.
You'd been kind of trapped and confined in this cult-like
Hmm.
atmosphere, and then you get 14, and I assume you started going to like a regular high school.
Yeah, I went to a regular high school, Westview High School in Martin, Tennessee. I had, I think, about 3 months of junior high left, which was excruciating for me because, I mean, just little things, again, that I write about that I just didn't have the sense. Like, I thought John Cougar Mellencamp was a real, like, type of cougar. Like, that's how naive my mind was. And then in high school, I just became very adept at masking. I faked it until I made it. I could flow in and out of any group, really.
Well,
Because
that's
you just
good.
become a chameleon, you don't have any connection to your authentic self. There's nothing to base it on.
When did you begin to um, open yourself up to letting yourself have those questions and following those doubts more?
I'm gonna say really when the internet came out, I just started exploring. I went through all kinds of phases. I was an atheist for a while, then I was Wiccan. I studied pantheism. I studied Santeria. I studied voodoo. I studied Satanism. read the Book of Mormon. Oh, I could go on and on and on. I needed to read it all, everything that was out there for me. And honestly, like I have taken a little piece of each of those that I'm like, okay, like I can dig that from like a humanity existence level. Like I don't need the entity part of it where you kind of throw things away. And after I went through that exploration, probably into my 30s, my early 30s, I came back to myself.
What does that mean for you?
For me, that means that I can keep my mind open to all possibilities. I think that I realized that after studying astrology and things like that and science too, that the concept of religion is very small in comparison to the possibilities of what our universe is. And so for me to believe that way would kind of like be akin to reading a kindergartner book, I guess. And that I just am very in the now. Like, what am I doing right now in this moment? And how can I empower myself with my own thoughts? And why would I ever give any credit for the work I've done, the books I've written? God didn't write those books for me. I sat and typed hours of those books crying and, vomiting out that trauma. So I just realized that whether I believed or not, I still had the power within me,
Interesting.
within myself.
Yeah, like for me, being an atheist is something that it consumes a lot of my thoughts because maybe that's just the way I am, and having come from a conservative background, and there's not many atheists compared to Christians in this country, so it becomes kind of an identity for me in a sense. Even though I know, many people have talked about how, atheism doesn't really mean anything; it just means you don't believe in God. It's not
Well,
like
at
what
the
you stand for; it's what you don't believe in.
right,
But
right.
so
And we're in a bad position because we don't have a leg to stand on. I kind of understand why is it the Satanist? What is the TST? I can't remember what it's called, but I understand why they registered as a religion, even though they don't consider themselves religion, because I mean, it's the same reason why atheists might do that, because there's nothing for us in the Constitution.
yeah,
See, except for separation of church and state. There certainly isn't a leg for us. Like the TST got that statute taken down, right? They tried to put the Baphomet up. They got that statute taken down, and they would not have been able to do that had they not registered as a religion.
yeah.
And so it's sad that that has to happen that way.
So even though you don't like labels too much, would you say you identify more as an atheist, or is there another term that you think you would gravitate toward?
If I had to pick one, I would say I probably identify the most with pantheism because I love nature
Okay.
and I'm really into nature and I feel nature, and that's where I find solace and peace for myself. I love to hike. Um, so maybe a mixture between atheism and pantheism would be the where I would fall.
Yeah, I've heard several people I've talked to, either as guests or just people I've talked to, have talked about how nature is their god.
Yeah,
they
yeah,
they get
yeah,
their. Well, I have a friend. She says she gets her mojo in nature.
yeah, yeah. I don't really like the word God, and I don't like necessarily what's happening right now, where people are like, no, 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 that God isn't the real God. The real God is consciousness. I'm like, that's just another cult mentality.
Yeah.
Because you're still identifying an entity. You're just defining it differently.
Or just
So,
calling it a different name, or yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I don't believe in this oneness theory. I fell prey to it for a little bit because, hey, it feels really damn good. But when I started breaking it down critically, which is what I do, I'm like, okay, let's put this into some critical thinking. I'm not one with pedophiles, and I'm not one with those people.
That's a good point.
Claim them, okay?
Yeah, there should be a dividing line there, right?
Yes, I don't believe in that concept of listening to people say, well, they're inherently good. No, they're not. Their DNA is effed up and they have no business being on this planet.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the reality of it. So I threw that concept away. But I have had, I feel like, a consciousness awakening to myself.
Did you ever have to explain your beliefs to family or close friends? I mean, because you lived in Tennessee. I mean, that's a very Christian part of the country.
I didn't have that freedom. That was not something that was allowed. Like, I'll give you an example. But, okay, me and my sister, I was very bratty. So, especially afterwards, I got very defiant. But my grandmother had rituals like at Thanksgiving or Christmas. She wanted everybody to sit around the table, and we were like, oh God, here we go. Usually, honestly, my sister and I would walk outside and smoke a joint. And then we would come back in because she wanted everybody to go around and read a Bible verse and tell what it meant to them. And I was a brat.
And you just came from a cult. You're just like, I don't want to be by the Bible at all.
I was like, oh, we got to go get high because I can't deal with this. But anyways, so I would pick Bible verses like Jesus wept.
Oh, wow. That is really funny.
Then I'd be like, I guess that means he cried. And then my mom would be like, stop it, and it just would, and then I would sit back and kind of laugh to myself. So I taunted a little bit with religion with them because it was still forced on me.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'd had all, like we were saying earlier, you'd had all the control taken away from you your whole life. Mm-hmm. So now you're given a little bit, they've loosened the reins a bit. So now you can kind of hit back a little bit if you want to.
I can get my digs in just anywhere I could without, like, you had to learn, like, what was the line to get your dig in and not get your mouth smacked.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, you're trying to, like, get your shots in, but not too much, because then you pay for it. But
right.
Wow. So okay, so you couldn't really be open. So when were you open about not believing in, like, the typical God and not really believing in God, that kind of thing?
Well, when I moved to Washington, and that's another story. My mom ended up relocating here. My brother had lived here before. He ended up coming down to Tennessee, like between Alaska and Tennessee. Okay. So everybody settled back in Tacoma, Washington.
Relocate to the godless Pacific Northwest.
Woohoo!
Which isn't so godless. I mean, you live up here, you see all the mega churches, and we have our fair share of.
It's so good here.
What was that?
It's why the energy is so nice and loving here.
Yeah.
Because we have all that BS judgment going on. I was going through like a Wiccan phase. A pagan phase. I had found out my genealogy.
Oh.
So I was really studying that and had found out that I was Irish, European, and Moravian Indian, and which is a Cherokee sect, which actually was Christian.
Wow.
And so I was really exploring that, and I really got into like Celtic rituals and stuff. And I know at that time my mom was really upset because she was saying that I was a witch and I was doing witch things. And I was an adult then, so I would tell her, I'm a natural witch. I was born that way. You took that from me, and then we would argue. So I just tried to steer away from that, but she did not like that at all, even though she was used as a visionary on the cult. They had this whole vision system. It was weird as shit. But my mother, I could see, especially in hindsight, often wavered between her reality and her cognitive dissonance. Sometimes her reality would slip in, where she would recognize things, but then slip back in. So she didn't like that. We really didn't discuss belief. Oh, and my sister married Muslim, and that really pissed her off.
Now, how long ago was that?
25 years.
Oh, so it's been 25 years. So 25 years ago. So, okay. So how old was your sister when she got married?
We'd only been off the cult about 7 months. It was an interesting position for my sister. I mean, I definitely believe that
She was
was
just a little bit older than you, right?
She's only 4 years older than me.
Okay, so she was a teenager.
Yeah, it's kind of like one cult to another, you know?
Wow.
It's the same reason why I ended up in a couple of abusive relationships.
Oh, yeah.
That's to you on a psychological level.
It's familiar in a sense. The control is familiar.
Yes. And he was an escape from my mother. She kind of like chose the lesser of two. I mean, he wasn't a bad person at that time, but it wasn't like she was choosing the lesser of two evils, but she kind of was in a way. I think she convinced herself she was in love to get away from my mother.
So it's interesting to me that you go from this cult, this highly controlled environment, to living with grandma and still going to church, but it's the feeling I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's almost like your mom wasn't as concerned anymore with enforcing strict rules.
When we first lived there, our trailer was on my grandma's farm. So my grandmother was very controlling as well. So it was like, you're on my property, you're going to live my rules. And church was social. But, my grandmother was a testifier. She loved to get up and testify. One of her big stories was how Irish missionaries came and found her grandmother, which was Cherokee, and converted her and got her away from what she called witchery, was really a medicine woman. And ironically, my grandmother went on to write 3 books. One of them was called A Girl Called Echo, because that was her Indian name. So there was just so much convolution going on. When we moved the trailer to a trailer lot, then my mother stopped going to church, because it was like, if she went to church, she had to be around my grandmother. But we would go on Mother's Day, Easter, those holidays, and my mother was still what she called always in the Word. So she would sit in the chair.
Still very devout in her own way.
Oh, yeah. To the end of her days. She passed in 2007. She definitely was a believer in the Bible.
And that coincided with you writing your book. I mean, that's interesting to me that, she passed away kind of when you were in a, no pun intended, but you were turning a new chapter in your life, Yeah,
I mean, she triggered it off. Her death triggered that off for me.
Wow.
It was like, now I can tell it all.
Yeah, there's some freedom there. And so when you guys had moved back to Washington...
I was on my own by then. I had, met my son's father in college, and that's how I ended up migrating back here. So by then, I had 2 children and my own life. And I raised my children to be free thinking. I didn't. I was always really private. I went through some of those phases as a single, I ended up leaving that relationship and was a single mom. And I went through a lot of spiritual phases. But I always kept it quiet in my room, private. I wanted my children to explore on their own. My eldest son is an atheist.
Well, what that's so great. I mean, I think about like what you came from, and it's like the exact opposite. It's, use your brain, figure it out, learn, discover, all that.
I remember they wanted to go to Bible school. They were like, can we go to vacation Bible school? They were 12 and 8. And my heart pitter-pattered. I think it triggered me a little bit. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? What would I do? Everything in me wanted to go, hell no. But I was like, if I tell them no, they're going to wonder why. So, okay, fine. I'm going to let you go. It's a couple weeks of free cookies and snacks. They're old enough. They knew body safety. I made sure I was a very hypervigilant mom in that way.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so week 1, they go through the love bombing. They color all the pictures, right? You know how this goes. They come back with their little white Jesuses and all of that good stuff and cookies and candies. And then week 2, the hardcore stuff and the boring stuff kicked in. And I think it was the Tuesday they both got up and were like, we don't want to go back. And I was like, okay.
That's really funny.
And that was the end of Vacation Bible School. And that was their only time they explored Christianity.
That's really funny. I have two sons, and when the boys were like 2 and 3 years old, we were praying with them, every night. And then when I lost my faith, I stopped praying with them because I felt like I can't, like I wanted to be true to myself, and I didn't want to like fake it, and I didn't know how I felt about praying with them anymore and all that. So they don't remember any of that, and it's so interesting having grown up so religious and then seeing my kids grow up non-religious. I mean, one, there's no difference in the sense that they're still kids. They're normal. They're humans. Like,
Yeah.
in other words, everything works out just fine if your kids are not religious,
Yes.
But it's just the contrast between the way I grew up, which wasn't, I had a good family. I mean, it wasn't like, a cult experience or anything like that. But I totally, I really associate with that when you're talking about how your kids, you're like, gosh, there's a Baptist church nearby, and they always are putting pamphlets in, like when the kids were in elementary school, in their backpacks, like every Friday night about this like fun time at the Baptist church, and
The school was doing that?
yes. And so I actually contacted the Freedom from Religion Foundation when it was happening to find out, can they do this? Because it's public school. And the school was pretty shrewd. They were they can't put any symbols like Christian symbols on the front, and they can't put any Bible verses, and they didn't. These flyers were very, they were well done in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just like, God damn it! Like I can't catch them on anything.
It's so overt, isn't it?
Oh, it's so sneaky. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like they're so deceptive, and they don't even see it. Like they're being deceptive, like people. And it's like, God wouldn't want you to be deceptive,
Right.
But they're lying for Jesus, so it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you,
Craziness.
one thing that really does make me upset about the state of Washington. I just did some study on the faith healing law exemptions, right? The faith healing exemptions. So I looked at this map of the United States. I'm like, I want to see who has these laws, because right now in Idaho, and this has been going on for a very long time, children die from faith healing, and there is an exemption in the law that disallows for the parents to be prosecuted.
Wow.
And that exemption says that they have the right to exercise their freedom of religion and pray for their children. Guess there's 5 states in the United States that have that, and Washington State is one of them.
Wow.
I would love to get something going to get that law repealed. It needs to get off the books.
That's crazy.
Because these children in Idaho, imagine dying from diabetes. Imagine dying from a concussion. Imagine dying from the flu, dehydration. They have no morphine, these are conditions that these children's lives could be saved.
Yeah.
And there are families who've had 5 children die and have never been prosecuted for not one of them.
That's insane.
I recently contacted the ACLU in Idaho about this, going, what the hell? Are you guys doing anything? But I was just very disappointed when I saw, because those states are in black on the map. And I'm like, Washington? Our state? What?
Yeah.
No, that isn't okay. So I'm working right now to figure out which senator or congressman is the right person to contact to go, we need to look at this exemption here in Washington. And it needs to be repealed.
I think even in Washington State, there's just such a, people are afraid to go after religion. I mean, especially like actually liberals in a sense, like we're in a very liberal state, you don't want to bad talk about Islam, like don't talk bad about it, but in a sense that's, that goes too far, like when it's Jehovah's Witnesses who won't let their child who's dying have a blood transfusion, that's a big deal,
Yes.
We should be attacking religion on that front,
Yes, and I agree. I won't attack your religion, but the moment that your religion puts a child at risk, I'm going to not attack your religion. I'm going to attack the crime of child maltreatment.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. It's like religion convolutes the crime, and it needs to be separated out. That is child neglect and maltreatment, has nothing to do with religion. I don't care if that's what someone believes. You're still abusing the child.
Yeah.
So let's look at the criminality of it and quit using religion at seeming to code it over. But unless we get this law repealed, it's still a defense that an attorney can use in court.
Yeah, and will. I mean, if they're that client's attorney, they're going to do everything they can to help that client.
And cults will pay for that. Cults like the one in Yelm with Jay-Z Knight, I know you know about. I know some lawyers that have worked with trying to get children off of that cult. They will pay for that. They want those kids. They want to win. They want to go, see, the state agrees with us.
Jeez, that's crazy. I was just talking to someone in this last week about, I think that's the same one that's Ramtha, right?
Yes.
Oh my God.
She goes, indeed.
I've never seen her do that, but I remember as a kid growing up in like the 90s, hearing it on the news, and my mom is a very conservative Christian, and so it was a big deal that this like kind of demon-possessed woman.
She's a 30,000-year-old entity.
Oh, that's ridiculous. But she's got a huge compound. She's filthy rich.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I want to get your thoughts, some reflections on kind of your experience. So when you think back on, you've come a long way, and I'm sure there's so many details filled in your book, which is, a great reason for people to to read it. But when you think back on the religious version of yourself, I know coming from a cult, it's different because you didn't really choose your religion as much as maybe other people kind of could. When you think back on the Christian version of yourself, what do you think about that person?
That's a deep question. Indoctrinated, mind controlled, no sense of authentic self, no critical thinking, a robot, fear. Those are the words that come to mind of who I was when I was a Christian.
Wow. Well, what's one thing that you would say now that you're not a Christian? What's something you've been able to experience that you would never have been able to experience if you had stayed a Christian?
Freedom, self-empowerment, knowing that I don't have to give credit away for my accomplishments and my gifts, that I get to own them, that all of the things I create, the art, the writing, the work that I do, I don't have to thank anyone else. I get to thank myself, not from a place of ego, but a place of honoring who I am and who I was born. And I look at it from a scientific space that this is my DNA manifesting itself. This is my DNA and my thoughts, and I own this, not an entity that nobody has ever proven actually exists.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I've had similar thoughts about my journey in the sense that like you can be proud of the things in your life that you've done just on their own merit. You don't have to turn and give glory to God who wasn't there doing any of it. Like you said, you wrote your book.
Yes.
You worked hard, and you can kind of take some gratification in, hey, I worked hard and I deserve, these good things in my life that are happening. Yeah.
And I think religion disempowers you from that. It tells you that you don't take the glory. The glory belongs to God. And if you take the glory, you're egotistical. Well, that's what I'm glad I'm disempowered for, or that I no longer have in my head, because that is a disempowering thought. That's saying that you can't do anything without this entity. Well, I'm proof that you can do a whole lot of shit without an entity.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally teaches dependence on God for everything. I mean, the Bible verses used to come more easily to me now earlier. Sorry, I'm not saying anything right. Years ago, I used to remember the Bible verses easier, but yeah, there's Bible verses that talk about like you completely depend on God, for everything. So it's definitely a huge part of the doctrine. And like you said, damaging.
Really is. And that's, I do kind of mess with Christians sometimes. Like, I'll say stuff like, do you do communion? Oh, yeah. What does that signify? Right? I play dumb.
Yeah.
Oh, it signifies, partaking part of Jesus's flesh and his blood. And then I say, oh, so you guys believe in cannibalism? And I say it very nicely. And it usually just makes them kind of go, like they'll get this, you've cracked that. You've put a critical thinking thought in their head, like,
Yeah.
damn, I've never looked at it like that.
You know, something that happened in my own life that reminds me of that is my Mormon friend, when he used to be Mormon, when I was in college, he mentioned how Christians, not Mormons, but like, I guess, Protestant, mainline, or Protestants or Catholics or whatever, wear crosses, and it's an execution symbol of execution. And that's really morbid. And why would you wear that around your neck? And I remember thinking, like, wow, he has a really good point. Like, that's really, really morbid. But at the same time, it's my culture. Like, I'm used to seeing my mom wear a cross necklace, or all the, people with jewelry that have crosses on them and stuff. It was just normal, but it's really morbid,
Just like the end of the world concept. If you really look at that, it's death training. To teach a child that at any moment they could die. And it might hurt and it might be horrible, but you're going to go to a better place. That is a horrible thing to put in a child's mind, because I feel like it created in my tummy this little sense of doom that I carried with me into my adult life. And until I could dig in and why do I feel this way in times when I didn't need to feel that way, times when life was great, I still felt doom. Why?
So it created anxiety in you on a long-term basis.
Yes. And when I connected it, when I was like, that's what this is, it went away.
Wow.
I no longer felt that. I realized that's what I'm feeling.
I worried a lot of... Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. It is. It's a programming. And so I think, to me, that's mental abuse of a child.
I remember worrying a lot about the end of the world. I mean, always like, did I pray enough and ask for forgiveness for everything I should have, because God could come back at any moment?
Me too. But at the same time, I can remember thinking, really? Because I always was kind of, I was a different kid. I was very into the moon and nature, and I loved the trees, and even on the cold, those were my little tiny escapes. If I could, in Alaska, go to the trees, I would go into the trees. Like, I wasn't afraid of the bears, but I was afraid of demons, but then I didn't really believe demons existed because I had yet to see one.
Yeah.
So it was just a constant crazy making of the mind.
Yeah.
And there's a peacefulness that I have now. That I'm settled inside of myself.
Yeah, that's funny. I that peace. It's funny how like Christians have the peace that surpasses understanding or whatever. But I have more peace now as an atheist than I ever did as a Christian. I'm like in the sense of like spiritual things and life and death. It's just kind of like I'm okay. Whereas a Christian, you're always worried, or you've always got someone to save.
Right. Absolutely. Or to judge.
Yeah.
I mean, I see so many, if God's so good, why are you an alcoholic? Why are you cheating on your spouse? Why are you miserable? Why are you broke? Why are you all of these things if God is there to help your life be better? Well, the answer your pastor might give would be, oh, you haven't prayed hard enough. You're not living right. You're not tithing enough.
Yeah.
So no matter what, if you're religious, you can't win.
We were talking a few minutes ago about taking credit for the things in our life that we have, accomplished, and not having to give glory to God anymore about anything. So when you think back on your entire experience of going from a cult to now being a free thinker, being able to, believe whatever makes sense to you, and not having the confines of religion. What are you most proud of when you think back on that entire journey that you took?
I'm proud that I did the discovery and I did the work on my own. I didn't listen to anyone else. I mean, even though I did read things other people wrote, I'm glad that I got in touch with my intuition and I was able to discern what felt right to me and what didn't. And I was able to throw it away. So, I mean, I'm thankful that for my Christian experience, because if I hadn't have had that, I wouldn't have known different. But I'm proud I did the work. I think that's hard for people to do, to read and do all the work that I did. Of course, I was curious, right? Because it was kept from me.
Yeah.
But I am proud that I did that because now I can really truly, with honesty and self-ethics, say, I've looked at it all. There's no stone left unturned. And I'm still back to my self-empowerment. So I'm proud that I did that.
That's a very empowering thing to do.
Yeah.
So in kind of keeping along those lines, what's something about you, that's a huge change that you went through from a cult upbringing to being free to think whatever you want. And that's a huge transformation for a human being to make. What about you stayed the same, like a thread that carried through all those years?
Well, I mean, I have, certain impairments that I have from abuse, like anxieties and things like that I, live with every day. There are parts of the Bible I find quite beautiful, honestly. Like Song of Solomon has some gorgeous poetry in it. I think it's sexy, the story of David watching Bathsheba take a bath in the milk, right? So
That's
there's
so funny.
little things, right, that I can read and still go, that's a cool little story. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter. It's an interesting work of fiction. I think I can now take that and I have a different perspective. I don't have the anger I used to have. I can put it into my own perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, I mean, I think you're saying that you were taught to appreciate the Bible as a child, and there's still things you can appreciate today about it. So
yeah.
I think that's
More
similar.
on a literary level, where then it was more on you have to live your life like this. Now I can look at it, as a book.
Is there something specifically like about you that you look at in your person, like who you are as a human being? Something positive that you see in yourself as a child that is still true about you today?
Definitely that I have a very strong intuition, that I'm highly sensitive and not in a bad way. Maybe sometimes a little bit with the social anxiety, but meaning that I can really feel people and I have that same empathy that I had as a child. No matter how much they tortured me, they could never, ever kill that part of me.
That's a good answer. That's kind of what I was getting at. But I like what you said about the different book parts of the Bible too, because that's something I found too, that I still appreciate a lot of the Bible. You said that you are kind of between atheism and pantheism, and you really, you love nature. I'll just say, so what's the best thing about being kind of in that space, being a non-Christian, being an atheist? What's the best thing about being, I'll just say, for simplicity, I'll just say atheist. What's the best thing about being an atheist?
I just feel, excuse me, my mind is opened. I feel like I see things from many more dimensions than I did when Christianity is like blinders. It's like taking your peripheral vision from you. Now I can see in all these different perspectives. And I think that's the best thing I take from it, is being able to have open mind and free thinking, and to be able to use my critical thinking.
That's cool.
To break things down. Even non-religious things. And that's how I live my life. So that's the best part of it, I think, is to have that open mind and that free mind.
That's great. Well, just like your podcast, you mentioned, you're doing it to help people and to encourage people who maybe, whose experience is similar to what you went through. I'm trying to do that with this podcast. What's something, when you think about someone who's in the situation you were in, and they're coming out of a cult and they're deconverting and they're they're an atheist now or whatever, but they're just kind of in the early stages of it. What's some encouragement or a piece of guidance that you would give that person?
I would tell them, just to explore, and that it's okay and not to feel guilty about that they have the right to explore anything that they want. They have the right to settle in that moment if whatever it is they're exploring feels okay for them. And at harm none, do as you will, including yourself. That's what I would tell them. Explore it all. Don't leave any stone unturned. And then you can say you really looked at the full spectrum.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what's a resource that you would recommend for someone who is deconverting from Christianity?
I have some good resources on my website, venniekocsis.com. If you go to the resources page, there's lots of different resources on there. A lot of different people have different perspectives on what cults are and aren't and things like that. And I would just say, use your discernment. Just remember to listen to your gut. It's going to tell you. To me, I always say that your intuition is your greatest magic, right? Nobody can tell you better than you can tell yourself. If it feels right, it probably is. Use your critical mind attached to that to know what's right and what's not right, and explore it all. But yeah, I have lots and lots of resources on there, so they can hit that site and see them.
Yeah, and I saw some of those, and it looks like you do some. You're an artist as well.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yes.
Yeah, you have a good variety of stuff on there. Blog, a podcast, art.
Yeah. I have to let it out, as much as I can.
That's good. Well, is there anything about your story that we haven't discussed that you wanted to touch on, or even something that you wanted to bring up, maybe not related to your story, that we haven't talked about?
Not really. I mean, I'm just really appreciate, you giving me this opportunity to come on and share my story. I just hope that people will connect with me. We do have some things going on. I'm involved with the CEO organization. We're looking at putting together a 2020 retreat for child survivors of cults and institutionalized abuse, like reform schools and things like that. I'm going to Alaska next year. Please, if you can afford to support me. That is the most important project. I really want to get up there. And there's some other cult experts going as well. We're going to hold a 2-day conference to just help those people understand what is around them and educate up there. So that's what I'm doing for the future for right now. Oh, and by the way, you might be interested in this. I was contacted by a woman who is looking at putting together a spiritual abuse conference next year in Seattle.
Wow.
So I'll stay in touch with you about that, because she asked me if I'd be interested in speaking. And I like to talk about trauma writing.
Wow.
So that might be a good venue for you too. So that's something that I'm waiting to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Shoot me an email or send me a tweet or something.
Okay.
Yeah, when you learn more about that, because Seattle, that's right in our backyard.
Awesome?
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, and I noticed that you're pretty active on Twitter, and you put out some really good information about related to cults and cult survivors and stuff, and so I appreciate the work you're doing on behalf of the people like yourself who went through that difficult stuff. I know I'm sure it's so valuable to people who have experienced it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. It means a lot to me.
Well, what's the best way people can get in touch with you?
Really, my website. My website is the hub to everything. There's even a contact page, and it goes straight to my email. I'm usually answer within about 48 hours. That's just a hub to find me on Facebook and Twitter and my Survivor Voices everywhere.
Cool.
That's my hub. So venniekocsis.com.
Perfect. Well, I will go ahead and for sure put that in the show notes and share that with my listeners. So, Vennie, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to come on the podcast and sharing your story. It sounds amazing, and it's really awesome that you came through all this and that you're using your time and energy to help other people.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you have a deconversion story you would like to share, email us at steve@vodpodcast.com.